Hello critters, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're new here. Today I want to do something a little different. I want to talk about the Boyfriend's webtoon and kind of just go over in a retrospective as to why so many people were very mad about it last year, I guess. I did go ahead and read the whole thing, you're welcome, it was a lot. But yeah, I'll get into that in a bit, and it's gonna be a bit of a long video, so get some coffee, get some snacks, and we'll get into it. So here's my intro. So everyone's heard of the Boyfriend's webtoon, I'm pretty sure. At least a lot of people, especially my audience, is probably the target audience of those ads that were showing a lot last year. And I myself was targeted by these Boyfriend's ads a lot and made plenty of my own jokes about them, how as a queer person I felt very targeted and kind of just like joking about it, of course. And it was just a funny thing last year, but I was watching some of these critiques lately. And I noticed some things that I didn't really think too much about last year when I was watching all these critiques, because again, there was a lot of critiques that came out last year. I started thinking about this video because I was wondering if people were still talking about it, because I remember it was a really popular topic about like last year. A ton of people made videos on it. So I went back and watched some of them after I read the whole comic, and I was like, oh, some of this stuff is just blatant homophobia and transphobia. But hear me out. Please watch the video before you click off or start typing about how I'm just like a terrible queer person who calls you homophobic if you don't like Boyfriend's webtoon, because that's not what I'm saying at all. I'll get into it, okay? Just watch the video, please. Okay. So into the actual reading of it. It took me about 2 or 3 days to read the whole thing, and I actually read most of it in one sitting in the first place because I was staying up super late and it was just kind of easy to parse through because there wasn't too much to think about. And then I read the rest a few days later, and it mostly consists of pretty short updates. There are a few mini arcs throughout, which last about like 3 or 4 chapters each, and then in between there's random cute little things going on. But overall, it was a pretty easy read. Again, not too much to think about, so I guess I'm going to give a quick summary. First of all, introducing the characters. There are Goth, Prep, Nerd, and Jock, also known as, they have actual names. Goth is named Felix, Prep is named Vincent, Nerd is named Adrian, and Jock is named Kevin. But no one calls them by those names, and so I'm just gonna refer to them as their archetypes, because it just might be confusing to refer to them as their names, and I can't even remember what their names are most of the time anyways. So, going into each character, so Goth is more emo than Goth, TBH, as everyone points out, but he's kind of like a quiet guy who streams and does digital art, which I think is pretty fun. I relate to him a lot. I'm also emo, and I do art, I guess. And then there's Prep, who's of course upbeat and snooty, and comes from a rich family, making him a little more uptight and ignorant, and just kind of throws money at problems, and that's part of his archetype, of course. And we have Nerd, who's a guy with hair color that keeps changing for some reason, that likes anime and is a nerd, I guess. Then I have more things to say on him later, because a lot of his character is like making inappropriate jokes, and I guess that's part of his character, but like, whatever. I have things to say on that anyways. But then there's Jock, who a lot of people like the most, I think, because he has the least info on him, maybe. And he's kind of just like a himbo, basically, who plays football and he's nice. So, that's the characters. Into relationships and plot, I guess getting into something, I noticed that there's plot for like the first 20 chapters, and then there's basically none. And so I'm gonna give the quick summary of the plot of the first few chapters. So what happens, it starts out where Goth and Prep are roommates, where they were childhood friends, and Goth has a crush on Prep, but Prep is oblivious, much to Goth's disgruntlement. So then Goth meets Nerd, and they kind of hit it off and get together after a bit. They get together pretty quickly. They both are better at communication than Prep is, where Prep is whining even more now because he's like, oh my god, I want a boyfriend. And then he eventually realizes that Jock has been hitting on him after they ran into each other a few times, after everyone kind of discusses it because he's dense. A lot of Prep's character is that he's dense. And that's a plot for a while. The most conflict happens with prep, I feel like, in the first few chapters, and I actually didn't really mind this part because it was very much just cute guys being dumbasses and missing very obvious flirting due to miscommunications, and like, I don't mind that. That's just a typical sitcom setup, and it's usually not something that I would seek out to watch or read, but I didn't mind it because it had some stuff pushing it forward, and I saw myself in some of it because I am also very, very oblivious to things. I never know people are flirting with me, and I just found it pretty cute. I know it's hard to say. It's hard to say that I found it a little cute, but it's fun to see the cute little like interactions of these characters realizing their feelings for each other, and I didn't really mind it. And then they get together though, and this gets resolved after a few chapters, and they quickly get into a poly relationship after a few more chapters that kind of have more plot, I guess, where Goth and Nerd kind of recruit Jock into their relationship and eventually Prep. And without much fanfare, it's revealed that Goth had a crush on Prep, etc., etc., and then they're all in a poly relationship, and everything's good now. And so then there's like 150 more chapters of them kind of just being boyfriends. And again, I'll get into my opinion on everything in a bit, but I guess my main thing is that I kind of wish that this plot overall was stretched out more. And even though it is like very kind of cliched, miscommunication, missing signs of flirting and stuff, I don't know, I think it was probably the most compelling part, apart from a few mini arcs that I'll get into later, of course. So yeah, there's a few mini arcs that happen throughout. There's like Christmas and finals and the usual stuff. And once it gets to season 2, there's a plot about them all moving in together, but that gets resolved pretty quickly. And so it's about 80% usual, like those 4 coma comics where it's just kind of here's like the setup and the punchline in an update, and that's basically about it for the most part. Each character also has their own conflicts going on, which are referenced throughout. So for Goth, he has trouble wondering what's going to happen once he graduates and is afraid of change, I guess. Prep has an ongoing storyline where he learns to value emotional connection over buying things for people. Nerd has some struggles with schoolwork and past bullying. And then there's Jock, who feels like he's in the shadow of his sister. And these are all brought up throughout each mini arc, and I'll go more in depth in a bit, of course, but that's about the gist of kind of the internal conflict between the characters. Oh, and also there's girlfriends that are also Goth, Prep, and Nerd, and Jock happens to be boyfriend Jock's sister. And so Goth girlfriend's name is Luna, Prep girlfriend's name is Stephanie, Nerd girlfriend's name is Lala, and Jock girlfriend's name is Alex. So again, I'm not going to refer to them as their actual names because I can't remember those names for the life of me, so from now on, when I refer to the girlfriends, I'm going to just refer to them as Goth girlfriend, Prep girlfriend, etc., etc., because I probably won't be talking about them much anyways. They're kind of like a little side story going on, and I think they're pretty cute, but yeah, there's not too much about them. And am I missing anything? No, I think it's about it. All of Boyfriends condensed into a neat little summary. 4 guys in a relationship do cute things, and that's about it. And yeah, that's it. That's the video here. So, why did it become probably the most hated webtoon for a while there? I guess first I'm going to give my own opinions on what is good and bad about it, of course, and then I'm going to cross-reference that with the opinions of others to see where the disconnect is and the sheer hatred that people felt for it. That's going to be the rest of the video, and I'm going to do a little bit of analysis as well. And first of all, disclaimer, people are going to be like, oh my god, you have bad taste, you like the Boyfriend's webtoon, and I'm like, I'm seeing this critically, I don't like this genre usually. And I do a lot of literary analysis. I don't do much on this channel yet, and I wish to more in the future, but I have a degree in creative writing, so I am going to use a bit of that to try and kind of explain some things about genre and narrative that I think are important to why people hate it so much. So I'll get into that in a bit. What I want to get into first is what I thought was good about it, and I'll get to what I want to critique about it soon. I know so far I've been like super kind to it, but I want to say what I liked about it first before I get down to the brass tacks. And there are a good number of things that I liked about the comic. I don't know, so I'll get into that first. First of all, the art style is really cute and effective in my opinion. It makes good use of pastels and bubbly shapes to convey a cute atmosphere for a comic that's as sweet and wholesome as it can get, you know? And some people might not like the art style very much because it's kind of like 2010s Tumblr-esque, but I think it's cute and effective and matches the tone very well. Second of all, something I didn't expect but was really struck by was the depiction of trans people being chill and good, in my opinion. when it first showed Goth with the trans flag, I was like, yo! And then it showed him as a kid pre-transition in like an old photograph, and it didn't invalidate his gender or go like, oh my god, look at him pre-transition, he was a girl, oh my god. It just did it in a way that showed how trans people might look in younger pictures of themselves that I actually got a little emotional about. I don't know if that's just me. Just like not trying to hide the fact that he's trans. I just thought it was a nice moment there. Like overall, I think the trans representation is probably good because the author Reef Rainbow is trans mask, and I can kind of tell that there's good trans representation out of experience, and I think that this really shows in his experience through trans characters in the comic because it actually just felt really refreshing to me. Not to mention Prep, who had known Goth since pre-transition, never really invalidates Goth's gender, and even in identifying as gay, sees Goth as a man, which I think is really important and of course validating because a lot of the times there's discourse, even within the queer community, of transphobia and not respecting trans people's genders, or regarding us as like the other, like outside of gayness and lesbianism, etc., etc. Also, quickly, another mini arc showed how Prep and Prep Girlfriend dated at high school, and they mentioned like, oh, but aren't you gay to Prep? And Prep Girlfriend is the one to explain that that was before her transition, and it was also like, it didn't invalidate her because of her identity, because at the time it really shows a little more nuance to gender identity and sexuality. I don't know, because I just found it nice that it was showing how she had come to terms with her gender later on in high school, and that doesn't invalidate her at all having dated a man. It just shows like a very nuanced approach to realizing your gender identity, and it was like, there was a whole part also where they were talking back in high school, and Prep Girlfriend is like, I think I identify as a girl, and Prep was like, okay, that's cool. And like their dynamic didn't change at all, like they're still like rivals and like kind of besties, and it doesn't change from before her transition. I think it's really important. I don't know. I just thought it was nice. Okay. And yeah, that's the whole, I just think the trans representation in the comic, I was really surprised by it because I didn't really heard many people talking about it before in terms of like positives, but I just really liked it. Onto the main characters, I think they have a cute relationship. I feel like Prep is the one with the most character development, not that there's that much because it's like a sitcom type thing, and sitcoms are written with mostly static characters in mind. But something I found sweet was that it's brought up throughout how at first he spends large amounts of money on his boyfriends until he kind of grows to figure out how to get them more meaningful gifts rather than expensive gifts. And I thought that was pretty sweet. It's kind of like something that comes up as a recurring theme, and he kind of grows over the course of the comic. And they also communicate really well, and there's a lot of consent shown in the relationship, which is especially important when it comes to polyamory. I think, note, I'm not polyamorous, and this is just what I hear from a lot of people talking about polyamory. Yeah, another thing I liked was, I don't know, I like the girlfriends a lot. They're cute, especially Goth Girlfriend. She's like everything I wanted to be back in high school. She's like really cute and cool, I don't know. And the girlfriends have their own little side stories that are cute and expand the story a little more past the boyfriends in a way that's nice, but also at the same time, it doesn't ever feel like there's too many characters going on, because it kind of just feels like there's like the main cast and the secondary cast, and I think that balance was done well. And there's some smaller things that I enjoy that I can't really think of at the moment. Like, just, I guess overall, it wasn't bad. Overall, it was really easy read, and I feel like that it does what it sets out to do, which is important. Like, it has a goal in mind, being just like a cute comic, and that's what it does. And again, I'm usually not the type to like this kind of stuff, so I didn't really feel like the target audience. And you know, it's not like exactly my cup of tea in terms of like something I would seek out to read, but I didn't mind it. I can definitely see where people think it's cute and find comfort in it. You know, I feel like there's an essence of when you're queer, finding media that's just like wholesome. You know, and like nothing bad happens. I don't know. Like, I know that's like kind of some discourse, like, oh, there should be conflict in queer things, but I think that it just does what it sets out to do. It's just like cute, comfy stuff. I know a lot of queer people find comfort in it. I don't know, but that's just what I know. And that's my opinion on what I think is good about the comic. So moving on to things that I didn't like so much about the comic. Again, I'm not really the target audience. I don't really consume this type of media. I'm more of a fan of like tragedies and murder and stuff, so I can't really say much on like how I personally wasn't that invested in it, but I'll get into a few things that I didn't really like in it. And not even like not like, more just like my own critique, of course, because I didn't really find anything that was like actually bad that made me mad, because it's pretty much the most lukewarm and vanilla comic you can possibly get, in my opinion. But First thing is that the plot died after about 20 chapters. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the part that was the most interesting to me was that there was a bit of an ongoing storyline at the beginning of, like, guys with feelings for each other getting together, but that was resolved very quickly. And when it comes to romance genres, I feel like a big thing is that if a couple gets together, like, right away, then what is the conflict apart from the will they, won't they? And I think overall this part could have been much longer before they all actually got together. But also, to be fair, the focus of the comic seems to mostly be on the relationship between the four of them and them doing cute things, so, like, it makes sense that they get together quickly, but, again, I just found the beginning parts the most interesting in terms of narrative, and I use interesting loosely because, again, it's, like, the most typical sitcom setup ever. And the rest of the comic is mostly just, like, disconnected, kind of disjointed storylines that don't really go anywhere. Season 1, I think, had a little more substance and an ongoing narrative as they try to figure out how exactly the relationship works, and there's kind of like a narrative arc where season 2 opens with them moving in together and they have a whole thing of like trying to find an apartment and there's like a little bit of conflict there, but then they move in and it's basically just back to normalcy and there's even less conflict than in season 1. Well, not even conflict, I say, but I mean in terms of things that push any kind of narrative or development. And again, with that, another thing about that is that conflicts are mostly resolved within a few chapters, which is fine for the format, but again, like, one of the things that is brought up multiple times being prep struggling to figure out how to show affection was probably a more compelling part of it, so having more things that are constant like that could make it more interesting and investing. I think just overall, like, even if it is a bunch of disjointed little comics and cute things, it's more investing to have kind of more of an overall arc for characters. I don't know. That's just me, though. I won't get much into this part because it's a personal preference, and I know a lot of people bash on it for this, but I feel like a lot of the humor feels a little dated. Like, a lot of it is very early 2010s Tumblr text post-esque of what 21 Pilots fans would find funny. And that's not like a shade. I was there. I was 12 in 2012 on Tumblr. I was part of that, but it kind of made me go like a few times. But to be fair, that's kind of just me, and I'll talk about that in the critique section as well. Just like some people find it cringe, and I just some of the humor is just kind of, it's a little dated, I think. And the last thing is that I wasn't really a fan of Nerd's character, in my opinion. The other three I found to be fun and have interesting dynamics and were, like, cute and stuff, but I feel like Nerd's character is especially flat compared to the others in terms of his whole characters being into anime, and then, oh my god, he makes sexual jokes all the time as a funny subversion, or whatever, and I just don't find his character funny. I don't know, I mean, I just don't think that he's a very compelling character, and he just kind of is more annoying whenever there's, like, a storyline based on him. I'm like, oh boy, here we go with Nerd again, making a sexual joke. Which, I mean, like, whatever. Do what you want. I don't like his character very much, but that's just me. And that's about it about what I didn't like. Again, I'm not really the target audience for rom-com, sitcom stuff. I did find it boring at points, and overall, I don't really plan on continuing to read it, just because I'm not interested in it, but that's my opinion. I didn't find it, like, horrific. I wasn't like pulling teeth trying to read it. It wasn't, and nothing, like, offended me or anything. You know, it wasn't bad. It wasn't like there was anything where I had to be like, this is a bad comic, you know? I mean, just some of the writing leaves a lot to be desired. It's the genre. It's not meant to have growth that much in terms of, like, sitcom and comedy and stuff, but it's fine. You know, it's not the best written thing ever. It's not like Shakespeare or anything, of course, but that's just me. Okay, so moving on to the critiques, the part you've all been waiting for. This section is going to be going over the common critiques I saw that people had for it, and I'm going to start out with the more kind of broad critiques and less serious critiques, and then go into more of the serious accusations against it, which, spoiler, a lot of it is just kind of blatant homophobia and transphobia, and I'm going to explain that in a bit. Again, please don't click off, because everyone goes, you can't say someone is homophobic for not liking a queer media, which it's literally not what I'm saying. Please don't misconstrue that. That's literally not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that some of the arguments against it were rooted in just blatant homophobia and transphobia, but I'll get into that. And on that note, I'm probably going to put a timestamp of where you can skip once it gets to, like, the pretty bad transphobia against it, because I found myself a little uncomfortable, at least, by some of the comments people were making, especially about the creator, who, again, is transmasc. Some of it was pretty triggering for me, so I'm gonna put a timestamp for people who might not want to hear some of those more serious things, but of course, like, if you're a cishet and you don't know, like, you should just watch it. That's just gonna be for, like, if trans people are gonna be uncomfortable by it, but anyways. Moving on. First of all, there's the cringe factor, and this is probably the broadest and largest critique of it that everyone has, and I think everyone and their mother has the stance on it. Probably the fairest and most lighthearted critique is that the comic is cringe. And by cringe meaning a lot of people find the humor very forced and cringeworthy, of course, to a point where it's sometimes hard to read because it will say things like "Owo Chaco" with a straight face and zero sense of irony. And this is a valid critique. I also found that I was cringing a few times, but mostly just because it felt like humor that would have been accepted a few years back. But today it just feels like an almost older millennial trying to relate to younger people like Gen Z with what they see as Gen Z humor. And I get that. It feels almost ingenuine a few times in that, but I think there's an explanation for that. First off, Refrainbow's first language is not English. He's Indonesian, so I'm wondering if holding the comic to the standards of, like, English internet trends creates a disconnect between audiences. And that's just an explanation. I think, of course, people are allowed to find things cringe, and again, I think this is probably the most valid critique. It is kind of hard to read at some points due to my own personal preferences, and I think also a lot of the cringe that comes from it is that some of us did have this sense of humor back when we were younger, like in high school, and it's just seeing that is like, oh no, the dark days, you know. I don't know, I don't really want to be reminded of my old Tumblr Homestuck days. I don't know, but that's just me outing myself there, but yeah. And on that, of course, again, I think finding it cringe is fine. I'm still probably going to be making jokes about feeling targeted by the ads, and oh, the ads. That's also the thing. The ads make it so much worse. And I think the reason why everyone's making videos on it last year, what brought it into the public eye, was how aggressively Webtoon advertised it, especially to people with, like, queer social medias because of targeted advertisements. A lot of people that I knew were like, "Boyfriends is attacking my gay ass," and I made plenty of these jokes because it was funny, but I think they've calmed down because they might have realized their aggressive tactics were making people more annoyed than anything. But also, to be fair, a lot of eyes were on Boyfriends then, and it got, like, everyone knew about it. It just kind of sucks in that vein, though, because advertisements make us hate things for being advertised to us. And to be honest, that being annoyed by Boyfriends ads, I think, turned into mass hatred for it, which, like, is valid because ads were annoying, but of course some people took it a little too far, calling it, like, the most harmful bad thing ever, is when things took a turn. I don't know. Again, I just think that it just sucks when something is advertised so heavily to a point where people just hate it because of, again, no one wants to be advertised to, you know? No one likes advertisements and goes, "Oh, I saw an advertisement for this thing and I feel so awesome about it," you know? But yeah, again, people took it a little too far in being annoyed by it and just kind of going on to say it's more problematic than it is, and I'll get into that in a bit, but, like, the world, if people can say they just didn't like something and move on instead of acting like not liking said thing, is some moral high ground, and people who like it are bad people, rather than just not consuming content they don't personally like. I don't know. There's a lot of problematic media out there, but when things get popular, even things as lukewarm as Boyfriends, it turns into actually fighting over morals, I guess. But thesis of it all is cringe does not make a comic problematic, nor even bad, I might go on to say. Like, people do like Boyfriends. A lot of people find it funny. I think there are large groups of people who aren't online as much as some of us, and that's not like a bash. A lot of us are more online than others, and kind of, like, more in tune of senses of humor, kind of going in and out of style, you know? So I think part of that could be it, but that's their preference. Especially with movements in the past few years to say, like, who cares about things being cringe? Let people be cringe. I think taking that to Boyfriends is a course of action. Like, I'll still make jokes, but I'm not going to attack or be rude to people who like it. Just let people like what they like. Who cares if it's cringe, you know? Oh, quickly, not to mention, Webtoon's ads literally sometimes show things that just aren't said in their comics. Like, they alter the text to sometimes make things more eye-catching. The Webtoon ad teams are kind of the ones that make things cringier. Moving on, though. So I think the second large critique that I saw a lot was the talk of stereotypes and archetypes, I guess, or in another order, archetypes and stereotypes, because I'm going to talk about archetypes first. The critique that I see a lot is that, first of all, the characters are very flat, and even in their names are lazy archetypes of, you know, goth, nerd, jock, prep. And that's also a valid critique. I think in that it feels very kind of surface level writing on these characters about their archetypes, and while they do have names, of course, these aren't used and are literally just named after their archetypes. But of course, in my opinion, that's definitely done on purpose. Archetypes are archetypes for a reason, and that they give the reader tons of background information and the smallest amount of information and exposition possible. Starting off the comic with these 4 archetypes allows the writer to get right into the scenarios between them without having to explain why these scenarios are funny and cute in the first place, giving context without actually having to give exposition, which is pretty smart in my opinion. Like, kind of respect towards that, I don't know, from me. And this strategy is used to much lesser degrees in a lot of writing, to be fair. Like, using archetypes to the advantage of the writer is... A lot of writers use that. Everyone uses archetypes. You can't say they have a completely original character. They're all based on archetypes, and yeah, that's a good thing. You can use archetypes in your writing to make your character more relatable from the get-go, you know? But that's that. But here it's just, like, very in your face, of course. It's, again, they're all named after their archetypes, and while it does save the writer a lot of explanations, it might be considered lazy. But I think it works for a comic that's not meant to be narrative heavy, especially with short, inconsequential updates, not having to take any extra time to give exposition to things they don't need to. As a webtoon artist and writer myself, and just like writing comics in general, I think it's definitely beneficial to try and tell a story arc of the update in an efficient way, so I'm not spending more time on things that I don't need to, and I can actually progress to better parts of the comic, and that's something that's very difficult for me. I know I have a lot of story in my own webtoon that feels like it's taking forever to get to because of exposition, but, you know. Anyways, the critique on the archetypes being lazy can be your opinion, and a lot of people don't like that type of writing. And that's an opinion people can have, that's valid. I just think it lends itself to the genre of the comic and makes sense for it. Now, tying that into a critique that's a little more accusatory, that the comic uses stereotypes of the queer community, some of these stereotypes being harmful, I guess, and I don't really agree with that in my opinion. Some people say the cringy sense of humor is mocking the way queer people talk, but in my opinion it is just kind of dated, which I don't think is mocking. I think the author actually just finds the humor in it himself. And also, as I've mentioned, the author is queer. And if the characters were all calling each other like slurs and talking about Katy Perry constantly without any other interests, and they were all the same cookie cutter gay character, then maybe I could see. But also there's that, like, literally kind of the point of it is that all the characters are different archetypes at the core of it and have their own interests and things, you know? I don't know. That's just me, though. I think probably the one closest to what one might see as a gay stereotype is Prep, in that he's overdramatic and always talking about wanting a boyfriend, but that's, like, only a part of his character, and it's actually kind of believable, and not exactly harmful in my opinion. I know plenty of queer people who have these traits, and when people dismiss very broad traits as stereotypes that shouldn't be depicted, it's sometimes like, okay. Like, queer people like that exist. Especially in that his major conflict isn't about him being whiny and wanting a boyfriend, you know? His major conflict is that he struggles to show affection in ways that aren't spending large amounts of money on his boyfriends, you know? And again, not to mention Prep is one character, and there are many others who aren't, like, acting gay, quote-unquote, or whatever, which, again, is fine. You can act gay. People can act queer. I don't know. People were just, like, totally bashing the comic, saying, oh my god, he's acting gay, that's so bad. It's like... you know, people are gay. I don't know what to say about that, but I think the whole negative stereotype argument against boyfriends is kind of null. Tell me if I'm wrong, though, that's just my opinion. I don't really see what harm these characters are doing in their portrayals. Like, even though they are archetypes and very flat, I don't, like, I know people that are all, like, these traits that these characters have are all so broad that you can kind of just relate to whatever character you want to relate to the most, and I think that's probably the main point of having these characters be so flat. But anyways, in terms of what wouldn't have been okay with stereotypes if they did do this, is if the comic were to, like, depict the polyamorous relationship as being all about drama and cheating, which it doesn't. It does the exact opposite, actually, and people get kind of mad about how little conflict there is between all of them, despite it kind of showing a poly relationship that isn't based on stereotypes in the first place. So it's like, people saying it has negative stereotypes, but if it did have negative stereotypes, I feel like that would be one that would be at the center of it, because, again, like, a big stereotype that I see with polyamory is that, again, like, it's all about cheating, everyone's always being dramatic over it, and, like, cheating on each other and being really jealous of each other and stuff, but none of that is shown in this comic, and a lot of people say that it's unrealistic in that sense. I just think it was trying to depict a polyamorous relationship in a way that's not driven by those stereotypes, you know? But anyways, on to the next thing. So the next critique I want to talk about, and one of the more serious ones, and probably going to get into more of the serious stuff, is some people saying the comic sexualizes or fetishizes queer people, especially gay men. And I'll say the comic does have several references to sex, and while Nerd makes sexual jokes, it's not like constant sexualization over the top, you know? I actually found it to be really tame in terms of all that versus other comics, especially centered on romance, where of course sex is brought up, but like it's not shown or overly focused on. There are a few scenes where they kiss and like sometimes it gets a little saucy, but even then it's like closed mouth kisses, you know? Maybe it zooms in on their lips a little bit, but it's not like over the top showing them basically having sex, you know? So I'm gonna get into some hot takes, perhaps. This is probably gonna be like the most controversial part of the video, but I hope that people will hear me out. Especially cisheads. I'm sorry. I think a lot of the arguments saying it's over-sexualized or fetishizing is based in discomfort around queer sexuality. And I don't want to bring up the argument that if it was straight, people wouldn't be nearly scrutinizing it as much, but I also do. Queer media has to walk such a tightrope when it comes to sexualization versus being too non-sexual, where straight media isn't held to that standard. If a queer media depicts a couple with zero sense of a sexual relationship, it's criticized for being fearful of showing queer sexuality, being too unrealistic, etc. But if there is any sense of sexual relationship shown in a queer media, it's immediately called over-sexualized, so like, I don't know if that's just me, but queer media really can't win in that sense, which I think just kind of sucks. I don't know. The comic is about college-age men in a relationship, and of course there's going to be references to how their relationship works in terms of physicality, because that is a large part of relationships in general. And again, it's not even, like, talked about that much. It's brought up, reference to, and they kiss, and they make out, etc. And the most they do is talk about it, and even then, they kiss. I don't know. I wouldn't even say it. Of course, I have to mention that there is a Patreon in Gumroad that has not safe for work content of the characters that can be paid for, but that's separate from the comic, and I think that, again, this is scrutinized much more than it would be for other comics, as this is actually a very common practice amongst webtoons. A good number of webtoons have not safe for work Patreons, and I know and talk to many webtoon artists that do this, and it's a way of just, like, making money or showing NSFW content of your own characters that are of age. And again, if they're all consenting adults, the author is an adult, like, stop demonizing gay sexuality. I don't know how much better to say that, you know? I don't know. Two more things on that note. One critique I see also is that Nerd edges on Shota or being, like, looking like a young boy rather than an adult, which makes it, of course, unethical to be putting him in sexual situations. But in my opinion, I don't really see that. I think it's mostly the art style, and Nerd doesn't really act like a child. He just kind of has a smaller body type than the rest of the characters, and again, with a soft, kind of chibi-ish style, he's not going to have, like, muscles or anything. And he does bring up a few times that he likes to dress cute, and how he likes more nerdy interests because of when he was bullied in high school. He wants to present how he wants to, and kind of get that time back of his youth. I don't know. Like, compare him to thinking about what actual Shota art is, and there's a major difference. And in the comic, he's obviously depicted as being a college student, and while he does act like uwu sometimes, it's not meant to depict him as actually a stand-in for a child in a sexual manner that real Shota and Loli is trying to depict, you know? I feel like that's the whole point of Shota and Loli, is that you're supposed to have, that they make this, like, shitty stand-in and say, oh, this person who looks like a 4-year-old girl is actually a 5,000-year-old demon, but it's a stand-in for creepy people, you know? I don't see that intention in Nerd as a character. And if you're personally uncomfortable, then I can't change your mind on that, but that's just my opinion on that. I just think it's art style, and again, it's not even like an overly, he's not even overly, like, childlike. I don't know if that's just me. Like, I'm a 5'3" little guy, and that's kind of just like how I look. I don't know. Moving on to the last part about this being fetishization, quote unquote. Here I'm going to get into some of the more triggering transphobia and homophobia, so I'll put the timestamp up of where to skip to if you're uncomfortable, but it's about homophobia and transphobia toward the creator rather than from the creator himself, in summary, so, like, don't worry about, like, missing any, like, context of the creator being bad, because it's against him. It's people being shitty to him, so... Getting into that, a lot of people, without doing any research, or even after doing research, write off the author as being a fujoshi, or someone obsessed with gay men in relationships in a fetishizing manner, aka wanting to think about the idea of gay people while not actually acknowledging gay people being, like, valid in themselves or real. And here's why I once again bring up that the author identifies as transmasc. With this, you can see a lot of his queer experiences in the comic when it comes to characters like Goth and Prep Girlfriend. As I said earlier, the trans narratives in this comic feel very genuine and given from the point of view of a trans person. This is obviously a queer person writing a queer story, in my opinion. Queer people are allowed to write about strictly queer things, in my opinion. I guess that's probably part of it too. There people say, like, oh my god, they're all gay in the comic, it's fetishizing. Anyways, like, I, as a queer person, mostly write about queer characters. and like 99% of my characters are queer in some way because that's just my experience, and I want to see representation more in media of people like myself and just queer people in general, you know, and that's just what I want to write, you know. So saying that a queer person writing a comic about a poly relationship between 4 men is fetishizing when it's more so just a lighthearted comic about what can be really very real situations. It feels very down to earth in terms of how people interact with each other. It's I don't know. It's of course it's like a comedy, it's like a sitcom type thing, but I think it just doesn't sit right with me. Not to mention, here comes the part that I hate the most. Sorry if I get a little heated here. It's this part that I really was uncomfortable with researching and reading about and hearing about. The fact that some people know the author identifies as trans and call him just a woman pretending to be a man because they fetishize gay men. Which is just, that's just a transphobic argument. I'm sorry, but that's what it is. In the first place, a trans person's identity is no one's business but their own, and speculation in itself is incredibly disrespectful. And again, God forbid someone is trans and queer and wants to write about their experiences and preferences. It has to be something you can demonize and bash by being both transphobic and dismissive of queer identities as a whole. Even I get that comment constantly in videos that aren't even related to queer issues, being the, like, you're pretending to be a man because you fetishize gay men. And I get that comment a lot. It sucks. People are just openly transphobic to me. It sucks. Being queer and trans is not fun. Like, I get that comment so much, and yes, it's like, I love having people call me slurs and comment this shit on all my videos, and not being taken seriously by a large population for my very gender presentation being just so triggering to cisheads, just so I can pretend that, like, I don't know, that I can write gay men more freely or some shit, even when it's even more accepted, it seems, for straight women to write gay men, rather than, God forbid, a trans man who identifies as queer writes about his experiences. But I don't know. It's rough being a trans creator, and it creates a preconception that you can't really shake, especially if you're someone who identified as something else while in the public eye already, or being someone who doesn't pass, like me. I know my voice is a little higher, and that's why people always, like, are being rude to me, but I purposely don't edit my voice lower because I want people to know that men can sound like me, and you know, I think that's important. But anyways, right over. It's just actually horrible how people talk about refrainbow and use actual transphobia as an argument. I don't know. Back to where we were though. Welcome back if you skipped that whole mess. I got a little heated, but it's just, I just can't stand some people. And I don't know, that's about it for that section. So on to the final critique. This part is going to be a little shorter, but mostly just talking about people disliking the creator and clearing some misconceptions about refrainbow. One thing a lot of people bring up is that refrainbow had drawn NSFW of BTS members, like NSFW comics of them years ago, which it's definitely not okay. That's not okay, and it's like very icky, you know? It crosses many lines, but also since then, refrainbow has apologized and mentioned that he made a post apologizing and explaining why it wasn't okay and how it crossed boundaries and everything and how he doesn't see that as okay, you know? And I think he's grown past that. I think he understands that it was cringy, and like, I don't know, we all did cringy shit, you know? The other thing that a lot of people bring up is that there's also an instance where he was found to have said a racial slur about an anime character, which of course I'm in no place to forgive, but I just want to clear up that it was when he was 14 years old, and I'm just putting that out there because a lot of people think it was more recent, or say it was more recent just to like try and bash the creator more. And again, finally, I think a lot of the hatred towards the creator is just transphobia. Saying he's not a real gay man, so we can't talk about gay men, which is, it's just transphobia. It's transphobia. And I don't understand why transphobia has become so much more accepted in the past few years than it was before, but anyways, it's cringe. Stop being transphobic, I swear to God. And that's about it. So on to the final section of this video, which is where I'm gonna nerd out a little bit about queer media in general and analyze the comic a little bit in terms of its genre and shit, you know? First of all, I want to talk about expectations versus reality when it comes to the very genre of the comic and why it is the way that it is. And why that's okay, in my opinion, being that it's like a very kind of surface level, cute narrative rom-com, you know? The narrative itself is very, very large, kind of loose arcs, season 1 being about them navigating their new poly relationship, season 2 navigating the trials of living together. This gives the story at least a little sense of direction, especially there being a recurring little theme in season 1 where they would all try to kiss and freeze toward the middle, not exactly knowing what to do, kind of symbolizing the way that they are all kind of a little awkward about the new relationship but open to it. I don't know, I kind of giggled at those parts, I don't know. And of course as it goes on, each character has minimal character arcs tied to their characters, which I actually don't mind very much. The thing that I wanted to talk about most though in my analysis is the way that the archetypes I feel are purposefully used to their extent and not subverted. A lot of people who talk about it, as I mentioned, express that the archetypes being their names as lazy, and especially in the way that they don't do anything to break these preconceptions. What I say about that is, like, why do there need to be subversions? I feel like in this day and age in writing, it's become an expectation to subvert things. Everything's about the subversions, you know? You see it in every goddamn horror game these days where, like, oh my god, look, a cute mascot. Oh no, now it's bloody and chasing you. To the point where when something isn't subverted, it almost feels like a disappointment. But in my opinion, no subversion is better than a lazy and forced subversion that I see in a lot of media these days, which is why I actually don't mind that there wasn't an attempt to try and subvert the archetypes. I would have been a lot more annoyed if it turned into lazy-ass subversions where it was like, oh my god, goth actually likes pink things but is just hiding behind a prickly exterior, or nerd is a chain smoker or some shit, you know? Especially with the simplicity of the comic, I don't know. I find that it makes most sense and works well with those archetypes being built on rather than trying to be lazily subverted. That's just me being tired of lazy subversions, you know? It's a pet peeve of mine, so I'm kind of glad that they didn't try and go ahead with those lazy ass, you know. And the second little analyzing I want to do is regarding the kind of standards that queer media is held to when it comes to narrative substance and substance to characters. There's a very long history of queer media having a great amount of tragedy and turmoil, with the barrier gaze trope, of course, in older media, where a largely straight media would introduce a gay character just to kill them off. And that sucked. But there's that, and on the other hand, there's a completely understandable want for queer media to have substance and conflict, as for a while it became hugely controversial to depict gay characters as having complex morals, which resulted in a lot of incredibly lukewarm and wholesome media, almost like Boyfriends, not wanting to offend anyone by depicting a complex queer character. And I remember a lot of discourse over that back in the day of like, you can't have a queer character have any kind of gray morals, or it's demonizing gay people, and it's like having complex emotions is core to being human. I don't know. That's me though. Like, if the only gay character is like evil and like is evil because they're gay, and like that's bad, but I mean, you know, I just, that's my opinion. So that's where Boyfriends comes in. It doesn't really try and say anything controversial. It is completely sweet. There's no plot to it other than guys being in love. This has sometimes been boiled down to the whole being gay is their whole character thing, which in my opinion isn't much of an argument in Boyfriends because they're all gay, and obviously, well, they're not all gay, they have different sexualities, and they're obviously different. But there's also an argument that queer media should have more conflict as a movement, kind of pushing back against the puritanism during the days of, like, as I mentioned before, saying that queer people can't have complex emotions. Like, back on Tumblr when Steven Universe was on and everyone was, like, really, really mad that Pink Diamond was kind of a bad person. And I'm not bashing anyone, but, you know. And I never watched Steven Universe, I just saw everything from outside. I just saw the discourse happening, that's why I know way too much about it. But in my opinion, I don't think Boyfriends is obligated to have any deeper meaning, as it wasn't trying to from the get-go. It's not trying to have a deeper narrative, and at its core is a soft and comfortable series of interactions rather than something that is supposed to be, like, innovative, if that makes sense. And I don't mean any of this in a bad way. I mean this in a way that it's not the point of Boyfriends to be trying anything new. And also on the flip side of this, side note of Boyfriends being too wholesome, I just want to bring up quick that it's kind of wild that people were going all in with calling Boyfriends the most, like, again, lukewarm comic where nothing happens, something super problematic. That's kind of rich when there's, like, plenty of media that's, like, actually problematic. And TBH, like, remember the movie Call Me By Your Name? It's still regarded as, like, a good piece of queer media when it's about a 17-year-old and a 24-year-old having a relationship, and that just makes me highly uncomfortable. And that might be controversial to say, but I'm like, back in the day, that was the kind of bar for queer media, is like having to accept there being this weird age gap just to have a piece of complex queer media, you know? And not to mention, there's also like the amount of stories about queer people that are just romanticizing SA, you know? You know what I'm talking about? Those Webtoon ads I see that are like literally just about SA between gay men. They're a bigger fish to fry other than Boyfriends where, like, they do nothing. I don't know. Anyways, going back to the topic, I remember back in the day when people were talking about Boyfriends a lot, they were comparing it a lot to a little anime called High Guardian Spice, where, oh boy, I want to make a video on that, should I? Which was also queer media at the time that was also critiqued for being cringe and lacking substance. But the difference here is that Boyfriends in itself wasn't trying to give, like, a big world-building narrative, you know, where High Guardian Spice was and fell flat in its writing. So I feel like comparing the two is almost like comparing apples to oranges, and I'd love to maybe talk about complexity in queer media versus narratives, not about being gay, having queerness in them, but maybe in another video because I kind of just want to talk about it. I don't know. Maybe my High Guardian Spice video, maybe I'll make a video about that, that'd be fun, I think. I don't know. But that's about it for my nerding out. I just wanted to give a few of my thoughts that I had while zoning out, thinking hard on it with some shit I would talk about in my discussion posts in writing classes, and yeah, so go write a discussion post in the replies, and I expect you all to reply to at least 3 other, I'm kidding, I I hated that. I hated that, having to reply to the 200 words. Yeah, that's a good comment. Yeah, that'd be funny though. It'd be funny to make a discussion post. We love doing literary analysis of silly things. And that's about it on boyfriends. TLDR, I think the greatest sin it committed was becoming popular enough to expand outside its niche circles to people not meant to be its target audience, as well as Webtoon just like annoying the shit out of everyone with ads of it. But overall, I don't think it's that bad. I'm probably not going to read more as it comes out unless I'm like bored one day and get curious to see how it's going, but like, it's funny because when I started this video, I wasn't expecting to make this long-ass video, like, basically defending the boyfriend's Webtoon. It wasn't on my 2023 bingo card. I was, like, legit thinking I was just gonna read the comic and go, haha, that's weird, and talk a bit about it, but, like, here I am, like, 40-some minutes into this video. Crazy what can happen. And I also just want to say real quick that there were a lot of cool creators back then who were saying a lot of the same points that I am in this video, giving a it's not that bad take and just kind of defending it a little bit, I guess, against people just kind of making bad faith arguments against it. And yeah, so it wasn't everyone completely saying it was really bad. Just a lot of the huge videos on it had like a lot of problems that I wanted to address in this, and I feel like a lot of them also had this like Puritan culture surrounding queer media in them, so there's that. So anyways, if you like the video, please share and subscribe and like and comment, etc. I put way too much goddamn time into this video, and it would really mean a lot. I'm actually kind of afraid of the amount of transphobia that might happen because of this video in the comments, because even on videos that aren't even about queer issues, I get so much transphobia in the comments. So again, please make sure to like and comment something about the video, not just like calling me slurs. That'd be awesome. So yeah. Also, let me know if you want to see more content like this where I review media, because I actually had a lot of fun writing the script and researching and stuff, because it's like what I did with my major in university, and it felt fun doing it on something that I actually wanted to talk about and doing that kind of analysis on an online media. I don't know. Or recommend something that I could review in the future. Something fun. I don't know. On that note, I'll see y'all critters in the next video, and thanks for watching this absolute monster of a video again. Love y'all. Bye.